All right. Okay, and welcome to Just Us Radio Network and Story from the Heart. And here we are today, as always. This is Jolly with my beautiful co-host Libby. Hi, and welcome.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to see the people that I can see. It's wow. I do like this Zoom.
Yes.
Yay.
And we'll get the music part right. So apologies for the quality of the music. We definitely. I was just so hurried today. I didn't even get to ask Barbara how to do that. So we will get that sorted very soon. But yeah, definitely Zoom. It's a better quality. We're going to be able to hear everything. And I'd just like to let everyone know who might not have seen. I did post up some information that Cynthia sent me. It's up on the justusradionetwork.net site. So that's justusradionetwork.net. It's on the first page. It's also on the links page. All the information that Cynthia sent about her story and what she's going to share with us. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that that's available on that site there. So, and the recording will be available on the show page, the 21st of September show page, which will be on the homepage as of tomorrow, once I get the link shared. And this show will actually go out on Blog Talk Radio, Justice Radio Network as well, tomorrow as a recording at the same time tomorrow. So that's 5:30 Eastern, out on Blog Talk Radio tomorrow, and I'll put that link up somewhere too. So that's that. So meanwhile, I think really this is a really good time just to bring in Cynthia and say thank you so much for joining us. Cynthia has been there for me many times in over the years and has introduced me big time to a lot of this down the rabbit hole stuff, and is very well informed and has been doing her own work on this for a long time. So basically, this is Stories from the Heart. So we're just in inviting you to share anything that you would like to share in your story as to where you've come from, where you've been, and where you are now. So I'd just like to open it up, and then if we have any time for questions at the end, we'll do that. So yeah, thanks so much. Cynthia, welcome.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and everyone else, because I oftentimes am not comfortable doing what they call public speaking for different reasons on these specific topics. But on rare occasions that I do, it's usually because I feel comfortable with the audience. And I know that your audience is usually a lot more open-minded and, even more important, open-hearted.
Yes.
For myself, at the very beginning, I could say that as a very young child, I had a number of situations that put me in deep depression, but it also caused me to realize that we do have self-determination. Because in one of those instances, I was going to bed, I was trying to go to sleep, and came to the realization that I do not have to be depressed in order to go to sleep. And I thought, well, that's pretty powerful, that you can determine for yourself that you don't have to be in any particular emotional state in order to go to sleep, which is very important for a lot of people. And over the years, at a very young age, you could say that I was a rebel, because I would ask too many questions of the teachers, for which one of them, I'll never forget, directly told me, well, why don't you go to the library? So I figured that, well, if the teachers don't have the answers, then I'll get my answers in the library. And let's just say, over the years, living in a virtual library, because my parents had many books on many different topics, including Carlos Castaneda, with his own adventures going, you might say, down another rabbit hole. And I would say that from my choice in reading, I am a life Gnostic because my father is a devout, I would say, I think the term is atheist. He's definitely by no means a Satanist, but he only believes things when they are physically shown to him. The only thing is that he also is blindly, you could say, lost in the government. His attitude is that anything you do, the government will have its say. And my mother, on the religious side, when I was growing up, you could say was a hippie or an eclectic, but more recently, she's decided to be a diehard Catholic. But I would say that her attitude or personality is definitely not Catholic at all. She's more lost in the money than anything else. And really, Satanists per se are not those that do sacrifices, but rather only believe in money and nothing else, for which my mother is definitely one of those, which to me is sad, but it's her choice. And over the years as I got older, I came to the gut feeling in 2009 that let's just say that the feudalistic system is perpetuated by so-called employment. And then also I got into the focus on the right to travel. I know a lot of people are also focusing on the issue with money and wanting to tap into the so-called estate account. I myself don't necessarily consider that important, but of course it may be relevant. My own focus is on self-identification. And what I've actually done in the experiences that I had started in what I would call misadventures or bad steps, because in the very beginning in 2009, I was one of those people that did not want to communicate in any capacity. And the problem is that when I did communicate, some people may laugh, I actually called for a grand jury on a traffic case for grand jury, but then what's kind of stupid is that I refused to show up to the grand jury. Now, with what I know now after the fact, it actually was totally appropriate, because even though I may have been a registered voter, it could be fairly said that technically I was not a valid registered voter, because nobody is given full comprehension or full disclosure to what it means to register to vote. And even though it's on the public record and in public viewing, that it's not the voters that determine who gets elected, it is the electors. And the electors do not necessarily have to go by the so-called majority vote. So anything related to voting, I say, is a joke. It's all part of the facade, honestly. And because I refused to go to so-called hearing or proceeding or grand jury or any of that mess, even though I called for grand jury, in my act of fear, I put together a 135-page, double-sided, plastic-bound document citing every single reference to the right to travel, i.e. without said license. And I know that when I turned it in with one of the so-called driver's licenses that I had, because I have a tendency to lose those plastic cards, I think subconsciously I was abhorrent to said license. The clerk made a copy of that document, and for their own records, for whatever reason, and she gave me a signed piece of paper verifying her witnessing my turning in or surrendering that license. Now, after the fact, after I turned in the license with that 135-page legal document citing both court cases and said state constitution and the United States Constitution and probably United Nations right to freely travel and other sites like that, what happened is that I did not have any of those documents on me. And technically to them, I was traveling on a suspended license. So when I got stopped by a local park ranger, because in 2009, by what would qualify as a federal RICO, separate from tort, the park rangers had a contractual agreement with the police that they can patrol and ticket the so-called public highways. And the park ranger, of course, stopped me with the plate and did a lookup on the license. And my life companion or husband, I knew that his license was also suspended. And I'm glad that he did not argue with me and had his mother take both him and her and me to meet the park ranger, who did, of course, a lookup on both Alf's license and his mother's license and verified that his was suspended, hers was not. And at the time, I know that, let's just say, he normally would have argued with me, but I'm glad that he didn't. Now, what's interesting is that she said that I would have to park the car and not drive it, and that somebody else would have to drive the car. But of course, there being only one so-called valid driver, being Alf's mother, we waited until she left. And then after she left, she was clear of the area, no worry about her coming after us for driving the car. We took both of the cars home, his mother's car and my car, for which Alf drove my car and I was the so-called passenger. Now, after all of that happened, I'm still what they say on suspended license. Then I found out about Eucadia and Franco Collins. Now, the difference for me is that intuitively and in my gut, possibly because I found out later than 2009, both of my parents have very strong, I had the word in my head here, hold on a minute, Masonic connections. Because my mother's father was a Mason, and as a younger girl, I was in Job's Daughters, and I know that my father's side has been very much in the church as well as the Masonic order. So I myself was in no capacity raised in any Masonic fashion that I'm aware of. And the only short term, maybe 1 or 2 years at most, I was in Job's Daughters. It was a very bad experience because you could say that they did their hazing and their initiating in very, I think the word for it is, oh, come on, there are times where my brain just locks up, but they were very abusive. Because in general, I've been overweight my entire life for various reasons. And so I was not happy at all in it, with one exception being a close friend that would actually help me out upon occasion. So having that Masonic connection, I think intuitively, I myself refused to join formally any collective organization. Instead, my preference is to, of course, you could say, as a community, actively participate and help the living, but not formally join, because if you formally join any collective body, then you are in fact saying that you are putting yourself under that collective body's dictates, their rules, their codes, order, which I am not comfortable doing. And as a result, I did not register what they call a Ucadia deed poll to the back of a not authenticated long-form birth record. There is a movement of people pushing to getting that birth record authenticated. And it's two-sided. There are reasons why you should, and then there are reasons why you should not. Now, at the time, I did not. And the reason all of this is relevant is because when the deputy sheriff decided to come and get me, I knew that there had been some form of political reason or religious reason for them doing their action. Because initially, when they came into the house, they in no capacity physically touched me. I did offer them my documentation, which they refused to handle or even look at. And because they refused to physically touch me, I know that something I had done was correct. And after probably maybe something like 15 or 20 minutes, I put my arms behind my back and basically said, not literally, but in summary, obviously we're at a standstill here, and I'm just going to go ahead and let you guys take me in. I, in fact, wanted the experience. I wanted to be a witness as to what would happen, and I'm glad that I did. And because I had done a religious deed poll on the back of the not authenticated birth record, however, it was after I had turned in the comprehensive, what I would call government or fiction and legal document, but I had made no reference whatsoever to either an oath, promise, or pledge in any pretext or context. So when I was walking down the front walkway to an unmarked contractor, Jeep or car, one of them asked me, "Are you a promise keeper?" Now, at the time, I didn't know anything about promise keeper, but I did know about what's called an oath keeper. And I didn't mention anything about the oath keeper aspect. I just looked at him totally confused and basically said, I have no knowledge to a promise keeper. I've never even heard of that. And at the time, I was also very emotionally upset. And I asked him, do you like your job, acting like Nazis? And asking him that, the driver just basically said, well, I'm just doing it for the money. That's it. And at the time, I learned about what's called the surname, or the legal last being called a surname, S-U-R name. And I knew that that meant chattel property owned by the so-called government, because it was created by an earlier king of England as a means of owning the common man, i.e. a tax on your head. Think of the bounty hunter, wanted dead or alive. But when I did an inquiry with the staff or the woman that was handling me in the jail, she, of course, knew nothing of it. And she said, well, she doesn't do any genealogy, but her sister does. And before I physically got into the jail, they put me from the Jeep into a paddy wagon. and from the paddy wagon to the jail. Now, what was very interesting to me, other than them putting me in the paddy wagon in the first place, was when they had me get out of the paddy wagon, they clearly said in ceremonial fashion, "Ship loading the dock." Now, at the time, I was amazed and a bit in shock, but I didn't say anything. And I learned, I believe it was, I would say 2015, that I should have said, well, the captain of the ship may be loading the dock, but the owner, meaning my soul, does not consent. But I didn't say anything. I just wanted to be a witness. And when we physically got into the jail, I was put in the holding pen or the processing area and refused to touch any of the papers that they gave me, of course. But what was also interesting is that I had been told in advance, not by any of the police or anybody, but in my network research group or circle, that when you're in the holding cell, typically they do not afford you any amenities and no privacy. Well, I must have done something right, because when I was in the holding pen and I told them that I had to go to the bathroom, that they put a piece of cardboard over the window and they gave me toilet paper. So they gave me privacy and they gave me the basic amenities. But also, when I offered to give them the toilet paper back, they said that they didn't want it, that I could keep it. And I was like, well, okay. And the rest of this narrative specific to this incident with the jail, I, over the passage of time, cannot necessarily give it in the proper order that it happened, but I do know that each one of these incidents did occur. And that is, one of the incidents is that they wanted to do a psych evaluation. Now, what was very interesting to me is that there were 3 entirely separate, what they call psych evaluations, which I could tell technically were nothing to do with psychology. It was all to do with medical records. And what was also interesting is that it was 3 entirely separate rooms, each denoting a separate so-called jurisdiction. And the third one, or the last one, it was made very clear a number of times that the last or the third one was entirely private, not to be construed as public in any context. So separate from that, also, they did take thumbprints, but they did not take fingerprints. And that was interesting to me in the digital screen, that they would only take thumbprints. For the deed poll, they did not take full fingerprints. Now, for those that have an open mind to what some would say very strange psychic experiences, I also had what I would call a acknowledgement by one of the entities. Now, for me, I don't believe in off-world aliens, but I do believe in different interdimensional entities, or what some would say is either angels, demons, or whatever, that can in fact occupy the man or the human body. And what I saw as a empath, not necessarily a telepath, in a different dimension, you would say, is a maniacal laughing skeleton or head. And the guy basically just nodded to me, and it was implied that I was there. And that was it. Nothing threatening, nothing dangerous, just being a witness, just as I was being a witness. which is very interesting to me. And after everything was said and done, I did first thing look up Promise Keepers to find out that it's the religious side of what many now know as Oath Keepers. So I learned about that, and I knew nothing about it, so it's something new I learned from the experience. Now, after this, in 2009, I was not necessarily active, but I was witnessing many different collective groups and what they were doing. And from those experiences, I just felt intuitively, for me, I had no interest, again, in being an active participant in any collective or fiction. And from the different, you could say, guides that I had, my trail was entirely to be with the living under the divine and natural law. And part of that is because it has been said for those that are religious, if you are considered a purist, if you acknowledge any flag, i.e. being a patriot, or any collective fiction, then you are engaging in a form of blasphemy. And I do not want any of those with the so-called false authority, i.e. said religion, to have any context to connect me with any form of blasphemy. And also, I, at the time, was, you could say, following Kurt Kallenbach. And the main concept from him that I learned very important is that the term will, W-I-L-L, is not limited to a document that is written that is specific to your material property, but rather the term will itself is specific to anything that you do by your hand, i.e. it's anything that you do, and that what you do by your hand as the living is more important. And I've since recently gotten validation that anything private, not put into the public in any capacity per se directly, actually cancels or overwrites anything that is public. And that is why I believe that what some call the deed poll on a birth record, even if it's not authenticated, has so much power. And it could be said that those in the government do not want us to know that, but they do in fact act proper if you do your documentation of your self-expression. And I also learned about the term inter vivos. And the reason inter vivos is so important is because it is Latin, and the words themselves mean among the living. So if you self-express as among the living, then it cancels any pretext, context, assumption, presumption to yourself being what they treat as the dead or chattel property, because even the United Nations states that the living, it is a serious crime to engage in slavery or ownership. And that's why I believe that those who do not give preemptive communication and head of state, even if you have your basic knowledge and comprehension, if the head of state does not correct the system, then you're going to be treated as one of the chattel property. And the other important terms that I think everyone should comprehend is the word counter deed. And the reason counter deed, not as a title to a document. You don't say counter deed at the top of the document, but the definition is any private document cancels anything public. And also for myself, I know I prefer the word rescind rather than revoke. And it may seem a bit, you could say, anal retentive, but voke, V-O-K-E, denotes something that is spoken, whereas send, C-I-N-D, or send means sending. So if you're speaking versus acting, so if you're revoking, that means to speak again or to give it more power, whereas to resend or send again implies you're doing it the second time to give it more positive power rather than speaking it. Whereas I know by definition, the two words are intermixed. You can use either one, it doesn't matter. I think for me, I just prefer rescind because in some movies, it's been implied that rescind has more power than the word revoke itself. Now, for the word will and the document or self-identification, it's very important that you research or look up holographic, H-O-L-O-G-R-A-P-H-I-C. Graphic means written, and hollow is something else. Off the top of my head, I don't have it. But I know that in not all but some notary handbooks, they do reference the holographic will. Now, what is important is that a holographic or handwritten will, it can be a comprehensive self-identification, not to be considered a physical description. A lot of people are confusing self-identification with physical description because the driver's license or the state-issued ID typically is a physical description. What I'm talking about is first, i.e. soul, spirit, heart, sound, conscious mind within living body temple. Now, some people prefer soul. They don't like to connect with the spirit. Others prefer spirit, not soul. And then there are those in India that I think is more appropriate, for which the spirit is the connector, the soul and the body, for which the soul and the spirit are not the same thing, but they are both connected to the body through the spirit. And then the focus for me is on what I call accepting and acknowledging God by any term or form, because by culture or tradition, depending on where you live, that God may have different names or forms, but it's still for the one God, and the living without the dead fiction. And this is very important even in what I call legal land, because it's been said, very important, for example, in property and mortgages, that you accept and acknowledge that mortgage deed. And most people do not even know the concept of accepting and acknowledging and writing on the property deed, accepting and acknowledging it. And it's very important. And then another validation to living witnesses and their power, separate from the notary, is George Washington's last will and testament. Now, on the last will and testament, I got into that much later. I'd say that was 2015. The notary handbook was, I would say, more like 2013 was when I did my first inter vivos will that was entitled. And I only sent that to the state secretary for the state that I'm living on. And on the outside of the envelope, I marked it as private and confidential. And I did send it to the living man that is the acting state secretary for Maryland, which is where I'm living. Now, what is interesting is it said that if you get no written response from said government to a private document, that does denote acceptance. Now, I got validation to that because in 2014, I sent a separate inter vivos will that was specific to money. 2013 was specific to the right to travel, for which I offered forgiveness for myself and those for all past actions from said government, police, etc. However, expressing in 2013 in the inter vivos will my full comprehension and knowledge that should any police officer choose in the future to even follow me, which is stalking, turn on their lights, which denotes an emergency, or detain me or anything else, that I hold the right to not only a federal RICO and tort, also a civil federal RICO and tort, but also violation to multiple law forms and multiple jurisdictions as the full military chain of command, for which it would be first that department chief, then the county head, then the state head, and the United States head, as well as the UN, because technically, in fact, the United States Corporation is under a signatory under the United Nations, and the UN, it could be said, is connected possibly under the Universal Postal Union, which is directly connected with the Vatican. So even though I don't necessarily know the process or the procedure, I am fully cognizant that I could give a report to each respective head of so-called state or military command to those violations. And I expressed that they, i.e. the state secretary, is to correct all relevant systems that I am to be akin to, though not as, a diplomat or ambassador. Now, a lot of people will say, well, where's the hard evidence that anything has happened? Technically, I can say that the only evidence I have is being a first-hand witness, that following sending that, I did get a call from the state secretary's office asking me about the voter registration, for which I did in fact find out that they would not cancel the voter registration. I had to do that myself. And at the time, I was a registered voter wanting to vote independent. And that's when I learned out about the whole so-called voting debacle, because I wanted to vote Green Party as a third-party independent and found out that not only was it not possible, but there was a major conflict within my so-called family for which they lambasted me for wanting to. Basically, I was supporting their opposing team, and they were pissed off at me for it. So even though I didn't really want to register to vote at the time, I figured, well, I'd do independent, and I learned a lot from that and will never participate again. So I did physically deal with the voter registration. Now, that's very important down the road, and I'll explain it later as things progress. Now, in 2014, when I did my, what I call financial will and will without the trust aspect, it was returned back to me. I think it was probably a test, because when they refused it, initially they made it out to what I call the wicker man's name. Most people call it straw man, but I prefer Wicker Man, because if you watch the BBC original movie called Wicker Man, and you switch the roles for which you yourself going to an island to investigate what is initially considered a lost child or possibly a kidnapped child, you will see that the natives on the island act as pagans. Now, my conjecture is that it's the government that is acting as the pagans that are coming after us because of our own ignorance, because the police officer doing the investigation is entirely ignorant to everything. And so the Wicker Man name. Now, in reply to that first return on the materials, I wrote a letter back expressing thank you for the time. However, I returned everything back expressing that outside the envelope is to be addressed properly, i.e. all lowercase and a full separation of the legal last from the lawful given name. Now, what's very interesting is that they made a full color copy to the inter vivos will, which is a pastel purple colored paper and magenta colored ink, handwritten, for which I had handwritten the proper name and address. So they made a photocopy and cut out that name and address and taped it to the front of the envelope, for which I did honor that. Now, the third one I did in 2015 was very interesting, because not only was it accepted by not being returned, but I also got a phone call from the state secretary's office specifically asking me, have I sent a copy of this to the county? Now, there was no mention of probate. There was no mention of court. There was no mention of it being recorded. The only basic question was, have you sent this to the county, for which I honestly said no. My interpretation is that it should be sent to the county council chair or the head of the county council, entirely private, not in any capacity public. Now, what I'm going to be doing, if life permits and my priorities and everything work out, which I think it should, is that I'm going to redo my will and trust with a separate deed poll on a fully authenticated birth record. And then separately, I'm going to do a recording to a notice, not recording the private documents, but recording a simple one-paragraph notice expressing that a private will with integrated trust and deed poll, for which that birth record by the record number and the authentication numbers is in that trust. And I'm going to be adding the aspect being a private foundation, for which the house and the land is in a private foundation, and that birth record being fully authenticated is in that foundation, and the foundation and its property is in that trust, which is in that will. And once that comprehensive document is done, I'm going to be recording a basic simple paragraph notice and then getting certified copies of that recorded notice sent with a cover letter to the United States Secretary Passport Department, the State Secretary, both for the state that I was born on, which is Virginia, and the state that I'm living on, which is Maryland, the secretaries, because the secretary is construed as the mediator between the living men and those that are dead, i.e. employed in the fiction, and the county, or the county that I was born on and the county that I'm living on, because I was born on what they call Fairfax County, Virginia, but I'm living on what's called Frederick County, Maryland. Although to me, technically, I'm living on what's called Ballinger Creek, which is not incorporated, not a part of the incorporated city or county or state. So it's fair to express that as well. And I have reason to believe that because I am adding the financial aspect for which the governor self-expresses as the trustee, it is fair to say that the governor as trustee should be paying all of the bills. And it's been verified by legal law that those that are government heads technically are supposed to be paying these things, not us, unless they want to be involved in fact, slavery. And what others have been doing, separate from myself, because there are many reasons I don't want to do any forms, any government forms, but a few people are in fact registering that state-created entity with the state, that they are living on, and as a result, it's all hearsay, but I have reason to believe that they are getting a full stop to all court proceedings again. Caveat I have is that you need to follow up with demanding that that public record be purged, because if they do not purge that court public record, that can be construed as not only mistaken identity, which is badly taken identity, i.e. they have stolen your identity, in fact, but also slander, along with other multiple violations and crimes for which most people not only do not have comprehension, but what's more frustrating to me is that they will not pursue a demand that it be removed from the public record. However, if you do demand anything be removed from said public record, it is very important that you get a certified of those records before you demand that they be purged, so that you do have your own tangible evidence should it be needed. And for myself, I made this basic mistake as well, for which I demanded that the record be purged, for which it was. But then after the fact, I thought, well, darn, now I don't have any of the evidence to them, in fact, acting improperly. Because I myself, you could say everybody other than bar card holders are legal idiots, and they are being taken advantage of, which is a crime. So if you're going to be a legal idiot, you need to have some form of evidence so that after the fact you can use it against them if you choose to. Now, the other areas to consider is there are those that want to be patriots. I fully respect them. That's their choice, be it a statesman, i.e. with the so-called republic state, or even with the United States, if that's your choice. But for myself, you could say that I'm an anarchist. Now, clearly I'm a pacifist. I'm not for violence in any pretext or context. So I believe that a lot of this issue with violence is really propaganda that's actively put out there because those that are in the so-called government, and it's really the puppet masters. I say those that are in government are the puppets, because even those in some level of management have no knowledge or comprehension of what's really going on. It's typically those at the top that have some type of comprehension. So anarchy in and of itself is self-governance, which is what it said that this country was founded on, was freedom. So if you have an issue, you think that government is good, well, that's your choice, but take into consideration that government is comprised of living men and women. And being comprised of living men and women, as you should well know, most of them, or I should say most of them, are well-intentioned, but misguided. And a lot of people, in fact, are with greed, for which it's been verified that all court judges specific to mortgages and foreclosures, in fact, do have retirement investments in the real estate market. So it is to their best interest, i.e. conflict of interest, that they side with the banks, not the so-called tenant, which presumes that they're an owner. If they were to read the documents, they'd find that they were not, because it is a perpetuation of the feudalistic system. And when it comes to religion or philosophy, my self-studies have guided me towards what's called Gnosticism. And that is in some contexts considered Christian, which is not the same thing as Catholic. However, Gnostic foundations, I have reason to believe, are a lot more ancient or older than what most people consider Christian or Catholic. It may very well be considered Muslim or Islamic, but I myself have not honestly researched the origins to Gnosticism to be able to honestly say what the foundations or the origins are. Now, in regards to my own process, there is an ancient tradition of introducing yourself to those in the community, i.e. the head of that community, when you come into it. And so when you become an adult, and by feudal system, you could be an adult at the age of 8, not even so-called 18 or 21 or 13. So if you have children, it is very appropriate, should your children be 8 years of age, and be able to comprehend the importance of self-determination and responsibility for your actions. If you think that they're ready, not just mentally, but also in their heart, and have the emotional stability, i.e. maybe when they get to be a teenager and not necessarily being a rebel in their outer actions. In their inner heart, it's fine to be a rebel. I've always been, but not necessarily by your actions. It's very appropriate to request an audience with your local government, expressing that you just want to introduce yourself and that you want to have an opportunity to communicate your own standing within the community. And you don't have to go into any of the details when you're asking for the appointment. You go into that when you actually get to meet face-to-face or first-hand with that man or woman. Then it's appropriate. And it's very important that you follow up that first-hand meeting with a written communication, thanking them for their time, and also just wishing to clarify and offer an opportunity for that head statesman to ask any questions because you want to make sure that both of you are on the same page and clearly comprehend why it is that you think and feel the way that you do. And especially if you can use their sources of or validate only for communication purposes. Because I know for myself, specific to what I call the wicker man, or other people call the straw man, not everybody is aware of this. I know many are, but not everybody is. The United States Style Manual, chapters 3, 5, and 11. It is very important to not only read those, but comprehend those, and to be able to communicate those relevance, as well as researching the origins to the term family as slave, and SUR as chattel property, separate from, if you look up the country of origin definition for that last word, typically it is a trade or profession, name of a place, and or a topical description, i.e. a hill or a stream or a river. And you may find that one of your ancestors, in fact, did live, either engaged in that trade or profession, city that was in that country by that name and or that topical description. And it's fair to say that you yourself are in no capacity connected with that word. However, you do hold close honor to your bloodline and your ancestors, entirely separate or independent from that word, because that word as a part of the name originated with what's called the Domesday Book. And if you go on the internet, any search engine, and put in D as in dog, O, M as in Mary, E as in elephant, S as in Sam, day, and then separate the word book, you will find in England, they have a website dedicated to have first written census. Now, I have reason to believe, of course, that there were censuses earlier than the Domesday Book. However, the Domesday Book is what is historically used as a part of the mental entrapment or the mind trap to that last word. And then a lot of people I know are aware of Capitus. However, they do not necessarily comprehend that the first letter capitalized denotes a debtor or an indentured serf. So even if it's not all caps as a fiction or a thing, when you capitalize that first letter, you are self-expressing in ignorance as one who is indebted to either a man or a fiction. So I myself always put the lawful given name entirely separate from the lawful honorary name. I do not co-join them together with a hyphen, and I make them both all lowercase. Now, some people may put a colon, 2 dots on top of each other, between what I call the honorary name and the legal last. That is totally appropriate. My caveat or contention is when you co-join the honorary and the lawful together, when originally they are in 2 entirely separate names for 2 entirely separate things, i.e. what many call the middle name is technically an honorary name to either a relative, either living or dead, or an angel or a religious figure. As such, that ancestor is an entirely separate thing. i.e. a now deceased, you could say living soul, that is not to be co-joined with yourself as the living man or woman, but you're giving honor or memory to that ancestor or religious figure. So for myself, I always put a backslash, and if you need a visual on the keyboard, it is usually the slash that is above the enter key, for which it is upper is the left side and the lower is the right side, between the given and the honorary. And then for the honorary being separate from the last, I use a forward slash, which on the keyboard is to the left of the shift key. And that is because the backslash above the enter key denotes two entirely separate names for the same man. It is one man, two names. However, the forward slash denotes a separation of two different things or two different objects. So it is very appropriate to put the colon instead of the forward slash if that is what you're used to. I'm just self-expressing or trying to explain why I use the punctuation that I use, the mindset or the logic to it. And other than that, I would say in relation to a lot of people now are wanting to copyright or trademark. It's very important that people know that copywriting does not require any form of government interaction or communication. All you have to do by legal standards is handwrite the word copyright at the bottom of either each page or the bottom of the last page of the document that you write. You do not have to register anything or pay any money with any government department for copywriting. However, for what's called a trademark, if you want to go into legal land and do a trademark, that is an option with that so-called name or to register it. From what I have learned is to not do any government forms in any capacity. Instead, it is to give fair what's called letter writing. And if you research what is called the men of letters, they basically write private communications only, nothing public. And it's been verified, not with evidence, but it's been verified by witness that that is the ultimate power as long as you are not threatening anyone. Now, of course, if you threaten a living man, you run the risk of getting retaliated against. So it's very important to always give what could be said a fair way out and just express that if there is any future attacks in any capacity, that you hold the option of reporting or calling for an investigation. And then in regards to the zip code, a lot of people have fair issue with the zip code. And I say it's appropriate that in your letters, you can fairly state that that number is given for reference by inference, and that your context to that number is as a rural, R-U-R-A-L, route, not a zip code, because if it is a zip code, that in fact is trademarked. The term zip code is trademarked. So you can fairly say that you do not want to infringe upon a trademark by using any reference to zip code. And other than that, I do have some important reading on money. And a lot of people should be aware, but there are occasions where I come across people that have not heard of the titles, one of them being The Two Faces of Debt. D is an elephant, B is in boy, T is in Tom. And that is available on the internet for free as a PDF, as well as separately what's titled Modern Money Mechanics is also available on the internet as a free PDF. Now, take into consideration, you do not have to read the entire document on any of these. A lot of these resources, the only thing you have to read is maybe the first 5 or 10 pages to get the basic concept. If you read past the 10 pages, then you're getting lost in what I call, what I should say a lot of people call the Matrix, or it could be called fiction land, or what I like to call the Grand Illusion. The music band Styx came out with the song The Grand Illusion. And to close out, I wanted to fairly express that the opening song, The Point of No Return, if you have not heard of that song or not aware of it, what you need to look up by title is The Point of KNOW Return, not The Point of NO Return. It's a very important play on words. And as it was playing in the opening, I was reflecting to myself that there's so many people that are at the point of no return, NO return, because they are by their own blind ignorance following the blind into knowledge that is misdirection. And there is so much misdirection by so many people out there. I should say I empathize and I comprehend, but sometimes it does bring tears to my eyes that the blind are leading the blind to other rabbit holes. And so many people are focusing on the cause of the problem and not the freaking solution. And we are our own solution in so many ways. And I'll close with that one.
Wow, Cynthia, that's fantastic. You really fed us some good information. Does anybody have questions?
Yeah. Right, yes, I agree. And I think it's going to be a really good one for us all to listen back through, because you've put in such a beautiful way of explaining your story, all the things you experienced, and what you've come to recognize that it seemingly works for what you've been trying to achieve. So yeah, absolutely. If there's anyone with a question, jump on in. I think you probably can unmute. If not, I can unmute you. So yeah, I think everybody's just trying to kind of digest the way of this information, because it's a lot of it's along the lines of stuff we've been doing, but there can be some, if it comes to the point that we we can compile a list of questions. We've done that before too. If anyone wants to ask questions, though, either jump in if you can, or put a message into the chat room here. Those on phones, I think you probably can just unmute on phones. So let's leave it for that for a minute. Who have we got there? No, okay.
Maybe.
Uh-oh.
Hey, D-Bot. Yay. Good to see you.
Hi.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ouch.
Yeah, anyone that's off mute.
Wow, I don't know what that noise is. Ouch.
Somebody's got an alarm going.
Okay, that I think they
Okay,
got what
so
happened
that-
is that you had two things going. Your phone was on and something else I noticed. So
Okay, so he was on the phone and on the Zoom. That was probably it, was it? Yeah.
something like that.
When
Yeah.
he clicked off, he was good then.
Okay. Anybody else have questions? That was so impressive, Cynthia. My goodness, you do know a lot. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and you've got a really good way of putting it across. So very slow and clear. It's really good and definitely it's going to be worth a listen. And like I said, I'll put the recording up like I did last week. I'll put it into a box file and it can be downloaded or listened to there. And I'll put it into Blog Talk and let it broadcast out tomorrow at the same time. So that's really good. Yeah, so meanwhile, Cynthia, you were working on something more recently. Are you still going ahead to be putting that in somewhere to see if that makes any difference to where you're at? Or do you feel like you're in a good spot?
Well, separate from the Inter Vivos, there's a guy that was locally recently moved to Georgia, and he explained that there's a small group of people that are writing to a Maryland military base asking for evidence that we are in their system, for which the reply actually hand-signed, not something that, as you would say, computer generated, but actually hand signed, specifying that one is a private citizen, as such, is not in their military system. Now, I did get that letter, but to my understanding, I'm the only one that then followed up that letter to that man asking, where is evidence that I am a citizen? And I got a letter back saying that, well, the Department of State or the Immigration Department would have the citizen information, for which I mailed a copy to.
Oh, I'm not hearing anything. Am I the only one?
Can you hear me?
We lost
Can
you
you
for a
hear me?
moment there. Yeah, we lost you for a
Yeah, we can.
moment.
Okay.
Get back.
What I did is that I wrote a military base, a small group of people writing a military base, asking for information that's in their system on that name, and the military base actually hand signed, it's a living man, signed a letter saying that because they're a private citizen, that there's no information in their military system. Now, what others I believe have not done, which I did do, was write back saying, well, where is there evidence that I am a citizen? Because the original purpose for the letter by these other people that are doing this is to get verification that they are private, not public. But I wanted additional verification that by definition, I am a citizen, separate from being private. So I wrote that man a letter asking him for evidence that I am a citizen, for which he wrote back saying that I have to write the Department of State and or Immigration. So what I've done, I've gone to the third letter now, for which I sent a copy of the second letter with a cover letter to that expressing I want the Department of State to verify by what evidence that I am a citizen, separate from being private. And I did express in that letter that it's my understanding that being born on Virginia, the Virginia internal documentation to vital statistics or Department of Health state that that birth record is to an event and not a living man, i.e. the same as Christmas or Easter. So technically, if they want to claim that I am a citizen, that they cannot make the excuse of the birth record. So they're going to have to come up with other evidence, for which I think it's fair to wait at least 5 or 6 weeks because of the Department of State having a lot of mail to deal with, you know, and things like that. And I mailed the 3rd letter out last week to demand evidence signed under what they call penalty of perjury, that there's evidence that I'm a citizen. And the only reason I'm doing this is because there are a lot of people that want something on government letterhead as evidence. If they don't have something on letterhead, then they're not going to believe it. So it's not for me that I'm doing this. It's just to give further validation to those that require it for their limited mindset.
Right. That's very nice of you to do that, to kind of give people, like, people do like to have evidence, don't they? They like to have proof and that sort of thing. Maybe this is a good moment just to bring up my experience that I relayed to you briefly on the phone the other day, that after you had helped me write all that stuff that I put into the court when I'd had the initial experience on New York, and I sent in, first of all, a whole list of discovery asking for the financials on the officers involved, including all the court officials and all that, blah, blah. I asked for the subscribed oath, and I also sent in to the State Secretary all of this, along with the paramount claim and the pronuncio restitutum. Now, the interesting thing is, when you said something about stuff getting sent back, the first time I sent that stuff to State Secretary, they sent back, I think they sent it all back, saying we don't understand what this is about. But at that point, you and I had some more stuff. So I just sent that whole lot back in. I remember, you know, you kind of guided me with that. And I sent that all back in, including those 2 documents, the pronuncio restitutum and the paramount claim. And that never came back.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we roll forward...
That means that they accepted it.
Right, that's what you said earlier. So this is why it's maybe relevant here. This is, again, we cannot say for a guarantee, we have no absolute proof because nobody said yes to this. But when we roll forward those 4 months and I had my second incident, and this time I was on Connecticut instead of New York, and I wouldn't give the name, I wouldn't give any name, blah, 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 on it went. Eventually they found the name because there was a money order in my Jeep. And they said, yes, okay, we found the name. Like you said, you're not a criminal. And yes, everything's okay. But there had been that case in New York where I had not shown up, but I had sent in those documents. So without it being absolute 100% proof, there's a large chance that those documents played a large part in my being released very relatively quickly in that second incident in a different state. Would that be something you would agree with?
Totally.
Yeah. Okay. So it's just, you know, again, we can never say this is absolutely definite. Because I put those things in, that was why I got out of there a lot quicker than most people have over the past time. But it just kind of points towards the fact, and like you said, the second time they never did return it. And so, you know, I'm wondering if maybe if I add an inter vivos, because I never did complete my inter vivos. You did help me with that. And I actually have written some of it out again, and along with some kind of fresh stuff. I'm thinking maybe, I only ever sent it to the New York State Secretary, and also to the DA and the clerk of the court in the actual original New York case that I never showed up for. But I suppose it would be no harm to send an inter vivos to the New York State Secretary. Now, I am not residing anywhere specific at the moment. I'm a little bit of a loose rolling stone at the moment. But having been technically born on New York, having done the original naturalization, from what I understand, is having done that, it's the same as the birth certificate. The naturalization is the same thing as the birth certificate. So
Right, totally.
New York's a place of birth, then, in that case, for this entity, Wickerman.
Yeah, I would say that it would be totally appropriate to do what they call a deed poll on the back of that naturalization, expressing that you own yourself. And again, I would not record it or make it public, but I would send a cover letter to the state secretary for New York expressing that any signature, any action with any fiction was done without full knowledge, without full disclosure, and without full comprehension, as such, was null and void when it was done.
Right. Yeah, so that's another possibility to keep in mind that I could consider. I've got all sorts of light irons and a few fires at the moment, as I mentioned to you before, but all of this stuff is, you know, everyone that's doing this, you included, Cynthia, are pioneers on this. You know, there's no set formula that we know this is the way to go. And this is why Stories from the Heart has become a place for everyone to share their stories, experiences of where they've come from, where they have been, where they're going, and where they are right now. And you know, this is a beautiful example of it, and the work you've done, and I'm well aware of the work you've done, and the information you were able to share with me when I was looking for help was enormous. And I do believe that my second incident, the one in Connecticut, was helped greatly by the guidance you gave me in the previous experience. So yeah, it's really cool. I'm really grateful for all that.
Jump in and say that D-Bot now is available and he's fixed his situation. So if he can ask his question,
yeah,
that would be really
great,
good.
cool. Yeah, D-Bot.
Okay.
Oh, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Oh, yeah.
Hello?
Now I can hear you. Go ahead.
Hello? Can anybody hear me?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Cynthia, George up in Mass.
Oh, hello.
I was just going on to the live, figuring I'll try to catch the live, and I'm glad to hear you're on. It's great I think it's a good bridge between all the things that have been going on with the whole name issue, and then kind of what we've had conversations about, which is, you know, how do you give proper notice in a paper world to, you know, your status and your standing. And I'd love to, sounds like we have some international callers. I try to listen to this show pretty regularly. If not, I catch the recording. It sounds like we have some international callers, and I was wondering if you would maybe, if you have a moment, to go through kind of what we discussed the other day. I didn't get a chance to record it, but I took some notes. But we had the foundational document being that the birth certificate, which creates the passport and all that. And I didn't catch the beginning of the show, but perhaps if you didn't, maybe you could.
Okay, so you're really. Are you talking about what they call the American National Passport Card?
Well, just the idea of, we had discussed I was going to be traveling next year, so I was going to go through some process before I had done some process around state nationality, and now TSA had restricted that, where I wasn't able to. It was a private document, if you will. It was a private membership, if you will. But TSA came up with this booklet that basically, you know, it's the same booklet they use when you try to get a cell phone or a mobile phone. You must have an ID from a certain particular jurisdiction. So they're using it, you know, commercially as well as, you know, through the traveling issue at the airports and whatnot. And so I was curious, as you know, as you envision this process unfolding, and we talked a little bit about it, say if I was going to go to Brazil and I had an expired passport, what kind of notices that you would suggest, as well as what kind of assuming that all these things have been filed at the county level, what other notifications that you might see would be prudent, and then also how you would verify that you could get back into the country, I guess.
Well, the primary overall important thing is communication. And I think it's very appropriate that even if you yourself do not want to stand under the United Nations as a body politic and corporate, that you express that technically all of those franchises or territories that are under the United States corporation company, that they are bound to those respective laws. And also that the United States corporation company is in fact a signatory under the United Nations. And it's been verified that the United Nations does in fact give protection or respect and honor to those that are considered undocumented, i.e. if you do not wish to hold or use a government issued, i.e. driver's license or standard passport or card expressing that you are chattel property owned by that corporation. Or that they construe that you are a trustee when technically government is the trustee. You can be fairly self-expressed as either the grantor and or the beneficiary, and or it could be fairly said the enforcer, because we have to do our own due diligence and enforcement by calling for an investigation or reporting on those that are not acting properly. So I always say that it is important and relevant to give proper communication the owner to the airport property, which you'd have to do some research depending on where that airport corporation is physically located, as well as the chair or the president to the airline that you're going to be traveling through, both going from and returning back from, as well as, I would say, the embassies that are the United States Embassy in the country that you're going to, and it could be fairly said the international embassy that is being hosted in America that you are going to be traveling to. In your example, you mentioned Brazil. So it would be the Brazilian embassy in the state that you are living. If there's no Brazilian embassy in the state that you are living, then of course the closest Brazilian embassy in America to you, as well as the American embassy in Brazil that you will be traveling to. And separate from that would also, of course, be the Department of State, the U.S. State Secretary. And what it is that you are communicating, I would say in this instance would be you want to keep it very brief, no more than one page. And as a part of that communication, it's self-expressing in some capacity in what your own beliefs are in relation to soul, spirit, heart, sound, conscious mind within living body. If you believe body to be temple or not, you just say living body if you do not consider your body to being a church temple. As well as self-expressing to your understanding to the United Nations protections to those that are undocumented or those that do not wish to be under said body politic and corporate. And it could be fairly stated, if you are religious, then do quote relevant passages from the Bible or citations from the Bible that express that you cannot be a part or party to said body politic separate from body corporate, and also express that to your understanding, until they provide evidence otherwise, you are not to be construed as anything less than or greater than a living man under the divine and or under God, not to be perverted into an animal. Because Alfred Adask has done extensive research and verified, even won 2 separate court cases per se, specific to the context of government interpreting or defining us as being an animal, even though it's been verified by state documentation that that birth record is not to any living thing in any context, rather an event which is not a living man, much less placenta, as Kurt Kallenbach's focus is. And then in relation to what a lot of people are going after, that American national passport, it is very important that you express, if you can, if it's in your beliefs, that you are not a part or party to said body politic and or corporate. Now, if you are a patriot, then it's very important that you make it very clear as to what context that you are said patriot. But I want to give you fair warning, it's been verified that if you are patriotic in any context, it can be interpreted as a form of conflict or war. And the reason is that even the American patriots, it could be fairly said, because I've verified that the Social Security Administration here in America is in fact owned and managed by the Queen of England. And separately, it's been verified that the IRS, possibly IMF, is in fact owned and controlled by Spain, i.e. Puerto Rico. So if you're going to be a patriot, then you're going to be at war with England and Spain and possibly France because of the body politic and separate corporate. So that's totally up to you. I give full respect and honor. I just want to give, as they say, full disclosure, so that those who do want to be patriots, they have full eyes open and full ears open as to what it is that they're getting themselves involved with, because most have no knowledge or comprehension. And then in relation to that 5-star passport card, separate from the book, it has been said that there are people that have in fact traveled outside of America without the book, rather using the card. Now, I find that hard to believe myself, but it's been said that it has been done. And a lot of people will ask, well, how do you get a 5-star versus a standard 3-star? I have reason to believe that the 3-star is for those that do the authenticated birth record with the passport form. However, they do not include a comprehensive brief on their self-identification and integrate a form of parlay or treaty with said government fiction. And the reason that this separate document, the self-identification, preferably handwritten as holographic, is so important in order to get the so-called 5-star is because, as I said before, any private document is or be higher than a higher authority than anything public. So if you do not give a comprehensive self-identification with a communication to a treaty with said government fiction, rather only the birth record without a deed poll on the back of it and the form, then you're basically saying that you want to be under the body politic and corporate, and that you're not in any way self-identifying. Now, if you do the self-identification as a patriot, it has been said that those who are under what's called Restore the Republic, typically that does in fact have Catholic or Christian religious connotations with it. So I have reason to believe that you can be a patriot with religious focus and possibly still get the 5-star card, because the real interpretation of the 5-star is that you are putting yourself under God and putting yourself under the divine, because I have reason to believe, but I have no evidence to this, that anything and everything in government is controlled at the top by a form of religious order. Now, it could be fair to say that the banks, i.e. the Federal Reserve Bank, is satanic, but it could also be considered part of the Society of Jesus, which is under the Vatican. So it being that the Vatican now clearly self-expresses as being legal as well as monetary, then to me it seems appropriate that any religious context that you focus on in your self-identification is in some capacity acknowledged by that 5-star, because you're making it very clear that you are not in any way threatening physical violence upon said men and women that are in that government and or their buildings. And this whole focus on the war on terrorism, I think, is really expressing that they want us, the men and women, to clearly communicate that we have no violent intentions, but that we are, in our own capacity, self-determined and what our own knowledge is. And in that capacity, I think it's totally appropriate.
Great.
Excellent. There's another, I guess, thought process that some have recently, I've heard of it, maybe it goes back, but they say that if you're after 3 generations, you're native here, and
right.
There's the idea that, you know, who were the, you know, the whole idea of the Vatican conquering, if you will, these lands. You know, if in fact people could recognize their own native status, and I didn't know what your research or thoughts are about that.
Well, for me, technically, that is totally appropriate and very important. It's just that very few people can comprehend that very basic concept. They can't get their head out of fiction land, as I like to call it, much less legal land. But for those that can get their head out of the matrix, or what I call the fiction land, it is, I think, very important that you first self-express as native born, if you in fact are. Now, if you were naturalized, then obviously you cannot technically make that claim, because you were not physically born upon this land. However, you can fairly say that being born under the divine or under God, and not under man's laws that are corrupt, that you have the right to freely travel, which even the United Nations fully acknowledges.
Yeah. Have we lost our caller there, or have we? No, we haven't got shut down.
No, that
Okay.
I have nothing
Okay, cool. Well, we've got just a few minutes left here, so let's bring Debot on if he's still there with us. Debot, can we hear you?
Yeah.
Can hear you, Cynthia. I'm just I can see Debot, but I can't. I don't know.
Okay.
Okay, let's see what happens there.
I know he was struggling. He had something going on there. So
Yeah. He's in on two different things. He's in on a Samsung, and then he's got a phone line in there.
Yeah, and I think that.
Sure, how he's in on both.
He says he can't come in. A phone text. He can't come in. Cyril, one of our brothers put a good question in there. Let me see if I can find it back because he wanted some clarification. Let's just see.
I was gonna ask too. Do I need to hang up, or can I listen in, or am I taking up the call line?
No, you're not taking up the call line. If just mute. I don't know if you have a mute button on your phone, but
Yes.
then that's all you have to do, and you don't even have to do that, but it just makes the lines clearer. So this is a question. What was the relevance of U.S. Styles Manual, chapters 3, 5, and 11? Something to do with family.
Okay. The United States Style Manual, for me, it's specific to, I believe it's either 3 or 5 and 11. And I think it's 5 that it specifies that a living man's name is supposed to be upper and lower case. But of course, that's still self-expressing as a debtor. And can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry about the echo. I don't know what's causing it.
It's
Volume.
Yeah. Debot, the thing with having the phone isn't working, so I don't know what you have to do. Is probably avoid the Zoom and just talk on the phone, because somehow
I don't have Zoom. I only have phone.
Yeah, no, it's not you, Cynthia. You're coming in perfect. It's just when Debot comes in, there's something that happened. And it's not
too much going on there.
Yeah.
We'll have to get you in another time, Debot, because Right. Yeah, we're going to have to sort your whatever going on with yours, Debot. There's something really echoing every time you open your mic, so we'll have to leave that. Okay,
Is
so
it fixed?
yeah, it's okay now. So I think Cynthia was in the middle of answering that question. And I basically, the United States Style Manual, I believe it's chapter 5, that it specifies that a living man's name is supposed to be upper and lower case, i.e. the first letter capitalized, not all uppercase. And in chapter 11, I know it does specify that an all uppercase name is specific to legal, L-E-G-A-L, and or a vessel, V-E-S-S-E-L, for which the word vessel is in all uppercase. So if you get any mail, i.e. a court issue, that has that name in all uppercase, then you need to point to or reference the United States Style Manual, chapters 5 and 11, for which the living man, not having a bar card, not being a member of the bar, and being a legal idiot, it is not
acceptable to having the name in all uppercase. Now, if they do that because specifically it's a court case, then you can fairly say, which I've not heard anybody else address, and this is very important and relevant for everybody to get if they're able to mentally grasp it. The term jurisdiction, the word jurisdiction itself means juris is a oath, promise, or pledge. Diction is spoken. So in all of these television shows about investigations and court cases and legal issues, they always use the word jurisdiction in respect or relation to themselves. Do they themselves have jurisdiction in that particular situation? So you yourself need to say, where is evidence that I myself have jurisdiction in this case or situation? And typically, they will not have any form of evidence that you yourself are with proper, valid, per law maxims, jurisdiction, or spoken oath, promise, or pledge. And that is specific to United States style manual, chapter 11. Legal or vessel is always all uppercase, not the living man. Otherwise, if it is a living man, then you have to have an oath, promise, or pledge to said body politic and or corporate. So when you challenge jurisdiction, everybody is challenging the court having jurisdiction. Now, those that are able to navigate legal land obviously are able to do this successfully. But most who are just doing their baby steps and trying to figure things out, there's no possibility. Whereas I say if you focus on yourself, them giving evidence that you yourself have a valid oath, promise, or pledge to said state, there is none. So you should be able to win that situation. But as always, I always give the caveat, there's no guarantees or promises because each respective man or woman in said court and or government has the free will choice to either act correctly, which is with morals and ethics, or corruptly, which is, of course, against morals and ethics by their so-called society or employment dictates. Now, for United States Style Manual Chapter 3, that is a different issue that somebody else brought to my attention. And to the top of my head, I don't honestly recall why it is important. I just know that you should definitely read, I would say, Chapter 3, 5, and 11 and comprehend those specific details. And when you read them and spend time internally digesting it, it should be able to help you in just about every situation.
Thank you. Well, that's really good. We're getting to the end of our scheduled recording here. So if anyone's got another question, that's great. Otherwise, maybe we'll finish up here and just say thanks so much to Cynthia. And I don't know if you'd be willing to come by again, and if people have got questions, we'd certainly.
Oh, sure. The only other thing I want to end with, to make sure it at least gets mentioned on the recording, is for those that in some capacity can research and study what's called natural law, separate from the original 10 Commandments. Not many people are aware that the original 10 Commandments have been perverted by the Vatican. And there are at least 3 or 4 different variations over the ages. So it's important to also find out what the original, and I also believe that there was obviously more than 10 as well. So if you could research, I would say the 20 or 30 original commandments rather than the Vatican's perversion to them. That is relevant as well as natural law with Mark Passio, and his website is whatonearthishappening.com.
Yeah, he's got great information, and that was a recording quite lately he put out, which is a really relevant point, is that one of the biggest problems we've got is that we're not united here. And this is what we are about on Stories from the Heart, is to take every point of view, everyone's way of going, and we all choose what route to take. There's no one right route, and that's the problem that Mark was pointing out on that recording, was that those on the other side that are doing all the evil or whatever, they're united in their evil. This side, we've got too much divide and conquer going on. And this is why Libby and I have chosen to bring on as many speakers as we can that are researching this in really valuable ways, such as yourself, to give everyone, the listeners, let's say, an opportunity to hear different points of view, different routes, different possibilities. And this is where we have to be strong. And yeah, I do recommend going to Mark Passio's site too. So absolutely, thanks for sharing that. And natural law, that's what we all strive to love. And I'm really looking forward to keeping going with these conversations, because it is about our stories, it is about our experiences, and this is how we learn and move forward in our own life experiences ourselves. So yeah, absolutely fantastic. I really, really appreciate that. Libby, did you have something else to finish up with?
I'm so happy, Cynthia. Hope you come back again soon, because we've learned a lot from listening to what your experience has been. So I'm sorry we don't have any more questions today, but I think there'll probably be a lot for you. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
sure. And my attitude is that I fully respect everybody's point of view. It's just frustrating to me when people try to tell me that I'm supposed to do what they're doing.
yeah.
And I go, well, I respect your point of view and what you're doing, but it doesn't mean that you have to force it on me.
Exactly. We just got one of our members just put the 42 commandments of ancient Egypt on in the chat room, people. So if you want, as we said before, we can save that chat so you have all the links in there. This is really
I'd be interested in a copy of that.
Go ahead. Oh, okay.
I was saying I'd be very interested in a copy of the chat with that reference.
Okay. How can we do that, John?
I'll save the chat again. I'll save the chat again. I'll have all the
yeah, I've just done it too. So if you,
yeah. So we've got a few versions of the chat with what those links are. So yeah, that's great.
Okay. What a team. What a beautiful team of people having this chat room going on too, because as you were speaking, Cynthia, people are trying to find links about what you were talking about. So it was really good for everybody. And I'm sorry that it didn't work for you, but maybe we'll figure it out next time.
Yeah, I guess we will. So yeah, we'll keep in touch, Cynthia, and let's see, when it works for you to come back. And I'm sure, I think this will have created a bunch of questions. I think we all will want to be listening back through it again. So, and it's getting, it's getting later over the other side of the water. We've got, UK, we've got Portugal. It's getting late for them there now, and it's only 4:30. So that's kind of weird for me. But anyway, thanks very much, everyone. I really appreciate it. Mia, if you've got any muffled music there, that will do, and we'll sort it out from here on in, and let's call it a night.
Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, Cynthia.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks so much.